It's a surprising day in the world of Magic the Gathering because we are finally getting information about the upcoming Tarkir Dragonstorm set. Rosewater has released the teaser list letting us know some of what we can expect, and it looks like Wizards of the Coast is playing with fire.
Magic.
I am a wizard!
History.
I'm an old wizard!
The Magic Historian.
My bones hurt. Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends. I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered for an informative installment of Mega Magic News. This is the Tarkir Dragonstorm edition, and as always, when a new set's coming out, Rosewater has dropped a list of teasers that give you little snippets about different cards. But considering that Wizards of the Coast has been keeping this set under tight wraps, I cannot recall a set in recent memory at all that was this hush-hush. Like Wizards of the Coast hid it in a closet under the stairs and went, "You stay down there, Harry Potter." It's that level of what's going on. So they've broken the silence, at least somewhat. So let's dive in to the teaser list, starting out with some things you can expect. There's going to be a cycle of Dragonstorm enchantments. So most likely they're going to be across all 5 different colors, or they might do sort of clan-aligned dragons. Dragonstorms, not dragons. Obviously, we know we're getting clan-aligned dragons with the spirit dragons. But when it comes down to these Dragonstorm enchantments, I'm wondering if what they're going to do is essentially each one will make a dragon that represents the different colors or color that the card is, and then they will have basically an ability granted to all dragons as well. So essentially, when this comes into play, make a dragon token that has stats XX and these abilities, and dragons you control gain X. Now, I don't know if that's 100% how it's going to go. It does kind of have a sliver vibe, but that is off the top of my head what I could expect to see for that. The next item on the list is 2 planeswalkers. So we know that the set obviously contains Elspeth from the story, we have Whispers from Ugin, and we have a Johnny. So those are your 3 main candidates, and as far as I understand, Wizards of the Coast has confirmed that we're going to be getting Ugin. So it really boils down to whether it'll be Elspeth or a Johnny. Now, a Johnny has just showed up so far in the written story, and he doesn't seem to have very much of an impact so far, whereas Elspeth has had impact in the story and shown up on multiple card arts. So I'm leaning towards it being Elspeth, but there is theoretically the potential for a Johnny as well, right? So we've got some counters returning in the set. Decayed, lifelink, and time counters. So everybody knows lifelink. Time counters are usually used to slow down when you get to do something, right? So it could theoretically be done in another way where you build up time counters and then something happens after a certain amount of time, but they tend to be things that you would remove and then do something at the end of removing all those. And Decayed, if you didn't know, is something we've already had before, where it created 2/2 zombies that if you used them to attack, they were just gone. They just got rid of them. So Decayed is making a return. I'm interested to see how that one's going to tie into some of the other stuff that's going on. Then we've got a card that can tutor for one of 2 other cards. So if they want to harken back to the earlier Tarkir block, they could go with, they had like basically a vial of Dragonfire and a Heartfire bow. So they could make somebody who could search those up. Actually, we had something that did that in the past. I don't know though, because those cards probably aren't strong enough by today's standards, right? So ultimately, it will probably be some new card that tutors for 2 other new cards to the set, because the power level of Magic has moved up, and when it comes to commons and uncommons, especially because of the change over to the whole play booster setup, we have an incremental power increase in that regard. So I'm not sure what that's going to be. A legendary enchantment, that could actually tie into another item on the list. So ultimately, just saying an enchantment's legendary isn't terribly exciting, except from the perspective of it's going to be quite powerful, right? Obviously, they're not going to make a legendary enchantment in this day and time that isn't powerhouse. Then we've got a Hydra that uses a clan keyword. That one is ultimately not that exciting to me. Hydras are cool, but the fact that they slapped a clan keyword onto one, it doesn't really get me fired up. After that, we've got a common archetype theme gets an ability word. So what they're saying basically is something they've been doing a lot is going to be codified down into a little term. So for example, we got something like that in Aether Drift, where they created the exhaust mechanic, which is essentially just this can only be done once per game. And obviously that is much more tight wording than explaining on each card, this can only be done once each game. So when it comes down to this, one of the strongest possibilities as far as I'm concerned is the double draw, which is something we've seen on a ton of cards in the last like 2 years or so. It really kind of started around the original Eldraine, but they've ramped it up. What I'm talking about is when it says, when you draw your second card in the turn, do X, right? So I'm expecting that that's got a good chance of being what they're going to codify here. Then we've got an instant that generates 5 effects. Now the question is it a modal spell with 5 different options, or is it something where you basically get an increasing amount of different options? Will it be based on the number of dragons you control? So if you have 1 dragon, do the first, and then for however many dragons you have, do all the effects? Or is it going to be something along the lines of a variation of Jeskai Prowess, where they go for each spell you've cast? Because this set does have a storm theme to it. We've seen storm cards already. So if it's basically you get more modes on the card based on the number of different spells you've cast in the turn, or I can't see an instant that does 5 things all on its own, but it could happen. And bear in mind, Rosewater likes to be tricky. So we've seen cards before that say target creature gets +1/+1, target creature gets +1/+1, target creature gets +1/+1, and you could say that generates 3 effects when it's really just 1 effect 3 times, and you can spread it around. So when you read that, you definitely go, there's a lot of potential. But there's also the potential that it'll just be deal 1 damage to any target, deal 1 damage to any target, deal 1 damage to any target, which would feel strange instead of just saying you do 5 damage divided any number of targets. But who knows with Wizards and the way they change things around. Ultimately, it's probably not going to be that last one, though. The next item on the list is one of the most exciting items that's going to get dragon lovers hyped. And that is, dragons get a new typal enchantment based on a popular zombie one. So this is going to be a dragon-themed enchantment that is a variation of something we've already seen, but for zombies. So you have, as far as I'm concerned, 3 major front runners for this. You have Rooftop Storm, which is an enchantment that makes all zombies 0 to cast. So you could have basically Rooftop Dragonstorm, and all of a sudden, Ultra Mega Dragonstorm. And so all your dragon spells cost 0. That would be incredibly hype, right? You also have the more recent Necro Duality enchantment. That's basically whenever you cast a zombie, you get to make a token that's a copy of the zombie. So it's a doubler effect, right? So we could see a dragon doubling effect, which again, people would be super hyped for. And then there is Endless Ranks of the Dead, which is an enchantment that generates a bunch of zombie tokens based on how many zombie tokens you have. So the more you have, the more you go. And that's the idea. So we could have one where however many dragons you have, that's how many more dragons you're going to get. And with Dragonstorms, obviously, any of this becomes possible. And as far as I'm concerned, again, this is going to be one of the most interesting cards we're going to see in the set. And depending on which one they choose, if they make it all dragons are free, people are going to lose their minds. The tokens, making extra copies, getting extra dragons is going to go over well. But if they do Rooftop Storm for dragons, it's going to be pure insanity, right? Next up, we've got a new instant and sorcery subtype. So are they going to make clan aligned spells? Whenever you cast a clan spell, you know, back in lore when they added creature subtypes in, so they could theoretically Mero could be being sneaky here and saying, well, we got a new subtype, but it's just a creature type slapped onto cards. So we'll see what that one will be. It could be hype. It could be nothing, right? Next, we've got rules text that'll be showing up on cards. Whenever you cast a turtle spell, untap this creature. Is this going to be a turtle lord? Is it going to be a turtle wrangler? Turtles have a notoriously slow vibe in Magic the Gathering. At least past turtles do, right? Like, is this going to be some kind of callback to Meandering Tower Shell, which was the gigantic turtle that we saw back in the original Cons block? It's weird to see turtle-themed stuff, but with the power level they put on cards now, one card could be enough to make turtles a meta thing, right? And also, bear in mind, there may be turtle dragons and all that, because the Dragonstorms are literally barfing out all kinds of different versions of dragons, and Tarkir isn't limited now to the 5 Dragon Lords plus their lineages. It's straight up anything goes when it comes to dragons. Now, next item on the list, as long as there are 3 or more different kinds of counters among creatures you control, this is probably going to be something along the lines of, as long as you have 3 different kinds of counters on different creatures you control, they're indestructible while attacking, or they get +2/+2, all creatures you control. Something along those lines is the vibe this feels like to me. Next, we've got, you may cast it without paying its mana cost if that spell's mana value is 8 or less. This is probably some dig on the top of your library. Maybe it has to do with the new Narset, right? Because Narset has abilities like this in the past, where Narset Enlightened Master let you cast cards off the top of the deck. So I could easily see this being something tied into Narset herself. After that, we've got a very interesting win con. If you put +1/+1 counters on 5 dragons this way, you win the game. So if you have 5 dragons out and put +1/+1 counters on them with this particular card in this fashion, you win the game. And I don't think that we've had a win con that cared specifically about just slapping a few +1/+1 counters on creatures. We've had ones that cared about power levels of creatures. They'd say, hey, put a +1/+1 on all your guys. Then if you have 10 power or greater, do X. Or the enchantment that they made for the Simic that said, if you have 20 power or greater, you just straight up win the game, right? So ultimately, I don't think that we've ever seen a you win directly that just cares about 5 individual creatures or a set number of creatures gaining 1 +1/+1 counter. Now, ultimately, you have to have 5 dragons out, so I expect this is going to be a sloppy sort of win con that's not going to be relevant for any meta like standard or whatever, but it will make dragon lovers very happy. And if we do get enchantments, like I said, that just barf out different dragon tokens, then it's going to be easier to make this happen, because it doesn't require that they're 5 different dragons in terms of they have to have different names or whatever. You could literally have 5 dragon tokens generated by whoever, like a Sarkhan Planeswalker from a previous set, whatever it is. All you got to do is have 5 dragons. Next up, whenever a creature you control enters, if you cast it, destroy that creature. This feels like it's going to be put on probably a powerful creature that like is obtusely powerful, and then as a result of you having it out, look, you have to cheat creatures into play other ways. Or maybe it has some amazing graveyard recursion ability. It's also possible that it's not even a creature, it's some other kind of enchantment, but the wording is wild. Whenever a creature comes out on your side, if you cast it, it gets destroyed. So tokens, avoid that. Putting it into play straight from your library, no problem. Putting it into play from your hand without casting it, no problem. Reanimate it from your graveyard, no problem. But traditionally casting it, destroyed. That is interesting to me. I'm genuinely very curious about that card. Next up, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast both a creature spell and a non-creature spell this turn. So you have to do both of those before you actually move to combat. I'm wondering if that's going to be possibly a give all your creatures a boost, or maybe you'll get an extra combat phase after that first. Like maybe they have it specifically stating if you cast this stuff before combat, because they've changed the wording somewhat on spells that give additional attack phases. If you look at the one that was released with Aether Drift, the way it's worded is you need to use that in your first main phase, because if you don't, then you're not getting any extra attack phases, right? So ultimately, that could be a get extra attacks. It could be some sort of fierce dragon beatdown insanity, right? After that, we've got, then if creatures you control have toughness 20 or greater. Toughness 20 or greater instead of power. So This, I'm not 100% sure what they're going to do with it. I doubt that it's going to be a you win the game, because I can't recall any sets really where they put multiple you win the game cards in the same set. So since we already have one for dragons as the weird build around me concept, it feels very unlikely. This would probably, like, if your creatures have toughness 20 or greater, then they gain indestructible, +5/+5, trample, vigilance, like everything. I just feel like you got to get to toughness 20 or greater, and we're living in the current era of Magic where cards are super powerful. So to me, if you're going to build up that big, the payoff has to be big. Then we've got another very interesting one. During your end step, warrior tokens you control have this token can't be sacrificed. That would be interesting if it created decayed warrior tokens, right? Because then this would stop the decay from going off, or any other things where basically you have to sack creatures at the end of the turn. This might have some weird built-in thing that says, hey, I make warrior tokens, but at the end of the turn you're like, Mongering Warlord, he makes X number of 1/1 warrior tokens based on the number of creatures you have, but they gain haste for this turn, they have to be sacrificed at the end of turn. But if you meet another particular condition, if your life is 5 or lower, fateful hour, we're super desperate, all of a sudden, warrior tokens can't be sacrificed at the end of your turn. So even though they say sacrifice me at the end of the turn, all of a sudden, they can't be. Now, if that's still built in, then if the creature still sacrifices itself at basically any end step, then they would still get sacrificed at the end of your opponent's turn, but they would get to stick around to be used as chump blockers or whatever else. So ultimately, that one's got me genuinely very curious. After that, we've got, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a card named card name, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So is this along the lines of like hunting dragon beast, and it just goes, all right, when you hit your opponent, or is it like pack dragon, something like that, where essentially once it hits your opponent, it goes looking for another copy of itself. So when it draws blood, it howls out, wolf dragon, oh, and then all of a sudden another one comes, let's do it, buddy, right? It is potentially interesting. And then the most insane thing out of anything on this entire list as far as I'm concerned, which is spells you cast have delve. So you can just remove cards from your graveyard to reduce the cost of the spell by 1 for every card you remove from the graveyard. Now that doesn't affect the colored part of the casting cost, but all of the colorless can be taken care of that way. And Delve is a very strong ability that Wizards of the Coast has had to ban multiple cards with Delve because of the powerhouse level of that ability. So what they put this on is going to make a big difference. If they put it on an artifact or enchantment, it's going to be absolutely insane. Put it on a creature, creatures are easier to deal with, so that takes the power level down a bit. But ultimately, getting around casting costs in Magic is one of the most dangerous areas in the game. We have had many cards that they basically had to outright get rid of because, you're negating the entire balancing mechanic of Magic the Gathering, which is the casting cost system. So giving all your spells Delve is wild. Then we've got some creature types that'll be showing up in the set. So you've got Dog Monk, you've got Elephant Druid, Yetis. Yetis are making a comeback. So we've got Dragon Bigfoot. He's just like, I was staying in hiding until all these dragons showed up, and then I knew no one would care about Bigfoot anymore because there's dragons everywhere. Then we've got a Djinn Cleric, Zombie Advisor, a Corinne. That is very strange. Corinnes we only really usually saw on Kamigawa, right? Did they do Corinnes in the previous Tarkir? And I'm just misremembering. It sticks out as odd to me. We've got a snake shapeshifter. It's pretty wild. A chimera. An ape snake. Is this like something that's been stitched together? We've got a zombie snake warlock. So those are the creature types. That's actually a legendary creature. And then they end off with some of the names in this set. So you got All Out Assault, Cruel Truths, Desperate Measures, Dragonologist, who I imagine probably gives you a reduction in cost on your dragons, can boost dragons, maybe can put dragons straight into play like an Elvish Piper going, oh, well, I didn't know if you know this, but monkey dragons actually really like bananas, and I just happen to have one here. boom, and that's how he gets the dragons to show up. I don't know. They've gotten really silly with stuff lately. If you haven't seen the picture of the cat dog that they released yesterday, the artwork for, not the card, just the artwork. Tarkir's got some goofiness to it. All right, then we've got 100 battle veteran. Imagine living through 100 battles, bro. All the stuff that you've seen, the 1,000-yard stare you'd have. We got Lightfoot technique, obviously something to do with monks. A rescue leopard instead of a rescue dog. We've got seize opportunity, stillness in motion, and war effort. So that wraps up all the teasers we have to talk about today. Let me know what you think any of these are down in the comments, because they are very much open to interpretation. And that's the point of this too. It's to get you hyped, to give you some info, and let your imagination run wild. So put that all down in the comments section. I'm going to be live over on my live stream channel tonight. You are welcome to come by and hang out. A big shout out to my patrons for supporting my channel. You guys rule. And I will see you all, my friends, in the next video.